Hello, this is Rob Morton, minister at Tucker Christian Church. This is our sheltering in place sermon for June the 7th, 2020. Still doing online services, although that is hopefully about to change here in 2 weeks. We are thinking about opening up the church to in-person services on Sunday morning at our regular time on June the 21st. That would be Father's Day. So June the 21st. Keep that in mind. We are still going to be recording our services and putting them here online on our YouTube channel. For those of you who are still hesitant about getting out, we want you to be safe. We want you to be comfortable. And we don't want to put you in a position where you feel like you have to get out to come to worship. This will be available to you still. I want to say something here before I start into my sermon about what's gone on over the last week. It's been a very disturbing week for our country. It started just over a week ago with the protests that are going on in all of our major cities. This has to stop. Innocent people are losing everything that they have worked all of their lives for. Innocent people's savings and businesses are being destroyed. And that may sound like, that's just an economic thing, but that affects people's lives. I've been unemployed before in my lifetime, and it is a very frightening and scary thing to have to endure. And this is happening all over the country as people's businesses are being looted and destroyed, and as people's jobs are going away because department stores or auto parts stores are being destroyed, and it's not right. It's not right. And what's even worse is that now lives are being lost. Innocent lives are being lost. Innocent protesters' lives have been lost. There have been a couple of those. Innocent police officers, and I know people are going to hate me for saying this, but I'm going to say it anyways. Innocent police officers who had nothing to do with the George Floyd death are being targeted and injured, and they're being killed. And that's wrong. This has changed from a protest about a horrific incident that should never have taken place to a war against our police officers, and they don't deserve it. There are bad police officers, just like there are bad people in every profession. But the majority of them are not like that, and they do not deserve this treatment. And this violence has to stop. It feels to me like we have gone beyond a protest and have entered into the realm of vengeance. And that's not godly, and it's not holy. It's an American right to protest. I support that, but not when people's lives are taken and destroyed and innocent people are injured. Enough about that for now. We're going to go into our sermon for today. I've been talking about great stories from the Old Testament, and I want to go into a story today from the life of Abraham. It was a story that always kind of disturbed me, and to a certain extent, on a certain level, still kind of does. Abraham and Isaac. And we're going to get into the story in just a little bit, but I want to tell you a different story to begin with that illustrates the point I want to make with all of this, and illustrates where I'm going to go with this morning. There was a man whose son's 6th birthday was approaching. And the little boy said he wouldn't mind a party, and his dad said, well, what do you want? What kind of present do you want for your birthday, son? And he expected a well-planned reply, as had happened in the past, like, I want a baseball glove, or I want an RC car, or I want a drone, something really specific like that. But his son's response was a little bit different. He said, Dad, I want a ball for my birthday. The dad said, okay, what kind? And the little boy said, well, I want either a football or a soccer ball. And his dad was a little perplexed. And he said, well, okay, which one do you want more? And the little boy said, well, I thought about it. And if you have time to play ball with me this year, I'd like a football so we can throw it back and forth in the backyard. But If you're going to be really busy this year, then maybe you'd better just get me a soccer ball because I could play soccer with the rest of the kids in the neighborhood. Well, the dad went and he shared this conversation with his wife, and then they both agreed that their son wasn't so much interested in the present, he was interested in the giver. He wasn't so much interested in the gift as he was in the one who was giving it. And I think that tells us something about worship. It tells us something about worship. True worship is not interested in what is created, but in the Creator. Oftentimes I hear comments and questions like, did I like the sermon? Did I like the service? Did I like the music? When we go to church, we kind of evaluate the service on those levels, but I think those are the wrong kind of questions. I think the question we need to ask ourselves is, did God like it? Did I like it? That's not the right way to approach worship. Did God like what I gave him in the service? That's the right question. And the deeper, more important question is this: does God like what I'm giving him with my entire life? We're going to go to Genesis 22 this morning. Genesis chapter 22. Again, this is an event from the life of Abraham. Abraham was a great man of faith, one of the most important of the Old Testament patriarchs that we find in the book of Genesis. He's an example of what God wants our faith to be like. He's not perfect. He struggled in many areas of life, just like we all do. But at the same time, he had an amazing trust in God and a real desire to honor God and worship him. And Genesis 22 records for us one of the most striking examples of Abraham's faith in God. God asks Abraham to do something that pushes Abraham's trust to the limit. It's Genesis 22, verses 1 through 19. I'm not going to read that because it's a bit long. I'm just going to summarize it for you. This is the event when Abraham took his son Isaac at God's command, took him into the wilderness, made an altar, placed Isaac on the altar, and because God had commanded him to do so, was about to sacrifice him. God had told Abraham, I want you to sacrifice your son for me. What a horrific command. Abraham was willing. Placed him on the altar, raised the knife up in the air, getting ready to strike Isaac down. And just as his hand was about to go forward, God stopped him. Said, don't. He provided a sacrifice of a ram that was in the bushes nearby instead of allowing Abraham to sacrifice his son. It's disturbing, isn't it? Does God condone human sacrifice? And we're going to look at that question here in a little bit. And we're going to learn a little bit about trust from this event in Abraham's life today. We're going to see what happened here. We're going to see some things that Abraham understood about God. And then we're going to see some things about our own worship as well. So hang with me on this, and we'll work through this together. First of all, this was a test for Abraham. It was a test for Abraham, but it was also a symbol for us. Abraham was over 90 years old at this time, and he had just been given the answer to all of his prayers. He had been given a son, Isaac. This is the most important gift he'd ever been given. Nothing in life was more important than what God had given Abraham and Sarah together. This was his most important gift to them as a couple, and this was an impossibly difficult test. God wanted us, though, to know the depth of Abraham's faith. God already knew. He understood that. God knew Abraham's mind, and he knew the level of his commitment. This test wasn't for God, and this test wasn't really for Abraham either. God knew his mind, so a test was irrelevant. The test was to be an example for us of the kind of commitment that God desires from us. God wanted to give us an example of what he considers a strong faith. God had no intention of allowing Abraham to go through with this. In fact, hundreds of years later, when the Israelites became an official nation, later on in their history, they began worshiping idols that demanded infant sacrifice, and God was disgusted by it, and he actually destroyed the country because of it. He allowed them to be carried off into captivity, and the country was laid to waste. That's not what God is condoning here, and it's not what God was commanding here. This was to be an example for us of the type of commitment that God wanted from Abraham and desires from us as well. And it was also to be a symbol of the kind of commitment that God has for us. This was a symbol of Christ's death. Would you sacrifice your own son for someone? God did. God was showing what he intended to do for us. This story always bothered me as a child. Why would God ask Abraham to do this? I couldn't understand it. It really bothered me, and still on some level kind of does. But I now understand that this is what God did for us. He held nothing back, even his own son. He gave everything for us. God didn't require Abraham to actually sacrifice Isaac, but he did sacrifice his own son on our behalf. That's the level of commitment God has for us, the level of love that God has for us. He was willing to go that far to save us. I think this is a sign of God's commitment to us. It's a symbol of what he has done for us. And I think that this is an example of Abraham's faith, too. That's the second thing I want us to look at here. There were two things that Abraham understood, and that I think we need to understand, too. First thing we need to understand here that Abraham understood was that every blessing comes from God, and we keep them at his pleasure. God gave Isaac to Abraham. Abraham and Sarah didn't make Isaac on their own. Sarah was barren. She could not have children. Isaac was a miraculous gift from God, not their own creation. And that's true of everything in life. We own nothing. We work and we buy things and we earn things under our system of government, and that's good. We have a capitalistic system here in America, and it's the best system that's ever been devised. It's not perfect, but it's the best. And the harder you work, in general, the more you can succeed. That works well. But ultimately, everything that we have comes from God himself, because he's the one who created it all. And God can give or take away. There are things that we don't allow our own kids to have because they would be bad for them. There are things that we've taken away from them because we love them and we want to protect them. And sometimes God is the same. God doesn't always give us everything we want, but he does give us everything that we need. Abraham knew that Isaac was a gift from God, and God had a special purpose for him. And Isaac belonged to God. Everything that we have belongs to God, not to us. But Abraham trusted God implicitly, and that's the second thing that Abraham understood that I think we need to understand as well. Abraham trusted God implicitly. Trusted God without hesitation. He knew that God was going to fulfill his promise. So he had faith. He didn't understand why God asked him to do this, but he obeyed anyway. Abraham didn't comprehend what this was about. He simply complied with what God asked him to do. And it's a lesson for us. We should trust completely. We should trust completely. Even when we don't understand, we can believe that we have a God who works for the best for us. We have a God who wants the best for us. He is a loving Father who cares deeply for us and wants everything to be good for us. We should trust him and we should obey him, even when that obedience seems difficult, even when that obedience seems hard. It's about trust. And the third thing I want us to see this morning is this is about worship. It's about lifestyle worship. God is looking for people who will give 100% of their lives to him. Abraham was willing to give everything to God because he trusted God. He didn't hold anything back, even his own son. And Jesus reinforced this point in Matthew 10:37. This is another difficult scripture. One of the more difficult things that Jesus said. Here's what he told us. Matthew 10:37. Anyone who loves his father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves his son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And anyone who does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. That's tough, isn't it? God is asking us for a sacrificial commitment to Him. God is asking us to be willing to give everything, if asked. Jesus said, "Take up your cross and follow me." Do you know how radical that statement is? During the time when the Roman Empire was at its height, crucifixion was one of the more common ways of executing criminals. It was horrific. It's horrific, and it was done in public as a deterrent. When Jesus said, "Take up your cross and follow me," people would have probably been shocked. They would have caught their breath. Like, what did you say? You want me to be crucified? The Christian life is a life of obedience. It's a life of sacrifice to do the right thing. Doing God's will sometimes requires placing our wants and interests aside. It means accepting God's commands as our duty, even when it costs us something. That's the kind of commitment God had for us. God gave us a powerful illustration in this event. How hard was it for God to give up Jesus? How hard was it to watch Jesus on the cross? How hard was it for God to allow His Son to be murdered? Not just to watch it happen, but to allow it. God's commitment to us was complete. He held nothing back from us. He gave everything. That's the kind of love He has for us. And that's the kind of commitment He's looking for in return. Are we living worshipful lives in which every aspect of life falls under His guidance? Are we obeying Him in every area of our life, from finances to relationships to work to honesty? Is church just a place for social interaction for us, or is it a life-changing event? I read a kind of a study that was done about church people not too long ago. The study kind of indicated there are a couple of types of church people. There are church people who go to church for the social aspect of it, because that's where they find family, and that's okay. That's part of the purpose of church. There are people who go to church simply because they can make contacts there. That's another type of individual there, that they're not really there to be wholly committed. They just go because it's a good place for them, maybe to make business contacts or whatever. But then there's a third type of individual that goes because they're true believers, and they want to absolutely be completely devoted to God. That's what God's looking for here. Are you giving God the kind of commitment that He has for you? Are you sacrificing to serve Him? Or are you only committed to Him if it doesn't mean you have to miss a golf game? It's a hard question. Maybe I'm making you feel a little bit guilty. Maybe you think I'm being a little bit harsh here today. But I think the commitment that we have for God needs to at least reflect the commitment that He had for us. Worship isn't something that we do just on Sunday morning. Sunday morning is very important, and we should not abandon it. Worship is a lifestyle of living to please God in everything we do. What Abraham did here was worship. Does our life reflect that same kind of commitment? The same kind of commitment that He had for us? That's my question for you this week. I know this is kind of a heavy sermon. I know that during difficult times, my temptation was to present something that was uplifting and positive and would make everybody feel good, but that's just not where I felt led to go today. I hope that you are being blessed. I hope that you feel God's presence in your life. I hope that God is taking care of you and is watching over you, and that you feel His presence. I hope that. That's my prayer for you. I guess what I would ask you in closing today is, are you showing Him the same kind of love in return that He's been showing you? God bless each one of you. I hope that this week brings good things for you, and that brings you the peace that only God can provide. See you next week.